Okay, let's kick it off, and we'll just let people join as they do. We have I think, a super interesting topic today. The topic for discussion is building long-lasting co-founder relationships. I think it's possibly one of the most important topics to discuss when you're building a business with someone. And I mean, I know from personal experience that when you start a company with someone, that person becomes kind of your one of your key relationships in life. I have one of those here on the panel with us, and it's really like an incredible experience. And yet, I think a lot of people approach it quite lightly and maybe not think ahead of time about how to set up co-founding relationship for success long term, which is why we gathered here today some of the really I think interesting perspectives on the topic. And I'm going to introduce the panel in a minute. I wanted to do a quick introduction about FemTech Lab as well. My name is Karina. I'm one of the co-founders at FemTech Lab. I'm going to be moderating today. And for those of you that are new to our community, I'll quickly explain what FemTech Lab is and what we do. We're a global platform for innovators in women's health. Our goal is to accelerate this amazing new wave of products that are just spinning out in this beautiful sector called FemTech, and we support the most disruptive, forward-thinking, and cutting-edge founders in the space, and helping them fundraise, take their product to market, and get all the support that they need to turbocharge their growth. Twice a year, we run an accelerator program. It's supported by over 100 mentors and expert advisors. Kari and Alan are from the OG group of mentors that we had in some of our very first cohorts. And we also have a very large network of investors that are all prime and ready to invest in the space. So if some of you here that are joining today are interested in applying, we do have a new cohort that's starting in the spring next year on March 1st, and we are already going to be opening applications for that in November. So make sure you sign up to the waiting list to be one of the first to know when applications are open. Okay, so that's about FemTech Lab. Now, coming back to the topic of today's discussion, co-founder relationships, and let me introduce the amazing panel. So first of all, we've got Kari Sulenes. She's a partner at Alpha Bridge Ventures and a co-founder of Pilea. She is also a doctor of clinical psychology, and she coaches founders, startups, VCs on human behavior and organizational design and integrative health. So very, very relevant experience to this conversation. Then we've got Alan Furley, co-founder and CEO of ISL Talent. And it's a business that helps startups to scale and grow and do that through talent planning and finding great people. So again, very relevant perspective to this topic. And finally, we have my very own co-founder, Katia Lang, the other co-founder at FemTech Lab. Katia is a serial entrepreneur. She's built a number of companies that we can't count anymore. And she actually has done that all with co-founders. So lots of practical experience. And Katia is also a certified coach. So she also has a really good view on personalities and mixing different potentials of different skill sets. A little bit of housekeeping before I get into questions. We'd love to encourage the audience to participate. Fundamentally, we do all of this for you. We, of course, get a lot of joy out of this, but we're trying to add value to some of you out there that are building startups in the space. So if you have any particular questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm going to try to weave them into the conversation as we go. Awesome. Okay, so let's get started. Let's set the scene. Kari, I'm going to ask you to help me to get going. Can you maybe talk about just talking broadly, risks and benefits of having a co-founder, maybe for those in the audience that are considering it or that are at very, very early stage of their journey?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with some of the benefits. I feel like the benefits are usually felt by a solo founder, right? The things that you feel that are painful about being a solo founder are the benefits of having a co-founder. You hear being lonely at the top. Having a co-founder can help with that. Of course, many of us also are what we might call spiky individuals, which means we have some great areas of expertise and excellence, and then a lot of things that we're not so great at, and co-founders can help round us out. Especially those of us who are motivated to start companies, I think tend to have kind of lopsided personalities, which make us really brilliant, but also mean that having others around us who can support our brilliance by filling in some of those gaps is super important. The other thing that I think can happen in building a startup is that many of us get our worth or our own stories completely entangled with the story of the company. And as a solo founder, there's very little outside noise to jolt us out of that kind of enmeshment that can happen. And so having a co-founder can sometimes help. Now, we'll talk a little bit, that's also on the risk side, which is that you and your co-founders can also become completely enmeshed in the company together. And that's usually when people come knocking on my door to help untangle all of that mess. But it can be really helpful to have another person to kind of be outside of your own head and your own story to help you see kind of who you are versus who the business is, and keep that kind of balance. So I think of those as some of the things. I'm sure the other panelists have lots of other benefits to mention. However, relationships are very messy. And humans are very messy. And so when you choose to join another human or have another human join you in building a company, it is like a marriage, it's a life partnership for the life of the business. And for many of us, it goes beyond that as well. I can think about co-founders that I've worked with that are still very much in my life in some complicated ways and some really lovely ways. And so it is a marriage, and it means that all of the things that are messy in a kind of romantic partnership are also messy in a business partnership. The kind of values match that you have can either be the best thing that has happened to the business or one of the existential threats to the business. I saw in the description for this event, the Michael Freeman stat, which is that 65%, I actually have to correct the stat a little bit, but 65% of startups fail due to people-related issues, I think is the kind of official way to say it. I don't think it's directly co-founder conflict, but we know so much of people-related issues actually come from the modeling at the top of the business. And so these sorts of relationships that we have with our co-founders can be messy and stressful. We often get in conflict around money or power or control, the way we do things, right? The kind of all the human stuff that's hard for us as individuals, when you add an extra person, becomes exponentially more complicated and more risky. So I'll just leave it at that because I want to hear what everyone else has to say. Thanks for the question.
Super good start to kick this off. I love that you instantly go deep, because I think it is beyond maybe some of the practical tools that you often find online, like just having a co-founder. Like it's psychology. It's a true kind of relationship topic. Katia, what do you say? What motivates you every time to do things with a co-founder, and what do you see kind of the benefits of the journey and the risks as well?
I think it's very personal. So there are people in the world, I have to say, possibly 20%, I mean, I'm making this up, but I think probably about 20-25% of people are actually better on their own. It takes a certain type of personality, a certain type of thinking, of kind of leadership. The type of people who are better on their own don't need a co-founder, and they kind of sometimes I see them trying to do so and trying to attract people into their sort of business or like into their idea even, and it doesn't really fly. Usually you see it straight away. So when Karina and me, we interview founders for FemTech Lab, we usually see straight away whether they are the type of founder who is good on their own, or they are the type of founder who actually really could benefit from having a partner, this type of thing. There are situations when you have more than two co-founders as well, though I personally have never been in one. in my experience, I've always had one co-founder, and I've probably made all the possible mistakes on this. I guess I'll probably speak about this later with my sort of lessons learned, but I guess the most risky part of this is that not only you're going to lose, if things go wrong, not only you're going to lose a partner in your business, but you also are quite likely to lose a friend and somebody who's intensely and insanely close to you in pretty much kind of everything you do. Because whether you want it or not, in a co-founder situations, through running a company, through building a company, through going through various ups and downs, and there's so many, you just happen to share a lot more with this person than sometimes even with your, your romantic partner. And it does happen to become, this person happens to become this closest, most reliable kind of, the most important thing in your life almost, which is actually quite dangerous if you think about it. Because imagine this person changes his mind and, goes to a different country or decides to quit or something else. And this happened to me more than once with co-founders that, they happen to be less resilient or more resilient, or they just choose some other things in life as opposed to running this company with me. And it's the amount of sort of not only emotional pain, but also kind of like it just gets really messy and really complicated to untangle the whole thing. Okay, what the business is going to look like? What are the investors going to say? What's now? What now? Do I need to quit as well? It's like we'll probably go into the legalities of this later on, but even just on the risk side, the risk of losing this person is huge. The benefits of having one, I mean, in my opinion, I would never be able to do things, well, and I say this, but I did run my previous company for 2.5 years on my own. But the benefits are huge because, again, you, as Kari said, you happen to be good at something and bad at the other half of things, usually, somehow. And if you have another half really well matched between the two of you, you're not double, you're like 100x of what you can be as a leader, as a business thinker, as a strategist. Because one might have an idea and the other might have a vision, and then you combine the two and then you have a strategy somehow. And it's this is the best, I suppose, way to do it, when the combination of two equals more than two, and it just improves drastically the performance of each one of the founders. So from the business perspective, it's well, also obviously from the emotional perspective, it helps, because when you are feeling one of those lows or one of those highs, you are just not alone. And nothing is worse than being alone in a company. And I have experienced that when you have the whole team of 6 people looking up to you, waiting for you to say something, and you just realize you're so lonely and you just have no idea what to do. It's hard. Maybe it's just me, I'm a bit of a softie, but I guess some people are like this, and it's always better to share this. You have someone to sort of look at and say, okay, we can do it. And it's just a very different experience.
Beautiful. Alan, do you have anything to add on the topic of benefits and risks?
I think I agree with a lot of what's been said, and definitely with Katia's point there that a problem shared is a problem halved. I think the aspect of risk is an interesting one, because I think you can make arguments on both sides. That I know that a lot of we work with startups often that are going to get investors, and investors will typically push back and say, Mr. or Mrs. sole founder, you need a co-founder before we'll invest in you. I know people like Y Combinator and Techstars, if you jump onto their webpage and look to apply, they will make it explicit there that they strongly prefer, if not demand, that you have a co-founder to support you on that journey. So they're doing that because they think it de-risks the chances of you building something valuable. But I think, as Kari mentioned, as soon as you bring someone else into the equation that isn't yourself, I guess you can fall out with yourself, but it's much more likely you're going to fall out with a co-founder than if you're doing it alone. So I think there's an argument from both sides, and we'll all know people that have built successful businesses by themselves and that have built them, you know, with a significant other. Maybe Katia is right. There's a certain group of people that know that they should be on their own for whatever reasons. I think the key thing for me is whether it's someone that has the title of co-founder, or whether it's simply a person or a number of people that do the job of co-founder. It's a gap that you can't live without. So whether it's to avoid that sense of loneliness that we've touched on, whether it's to give you that sounding board, whether it's to push you or comfort you or to course correct you, I think, you know, I can't think of anybody I know that's built a successful business that hasn't had that person or people or group around them. Whether a co-founder or not is probably less important than making sure you've got that support, and often that most naturally comes from having a co-founder, in my experience.
Cool. Thank you for that. It's a really good way to start this off. Next question I had was, let's say, you know, you found that person that is very complementary, and you think you can build amazing things together. There's, you know, an exciting vision, and you're buzzing, and you're like, all right, shall we do this together? What are the things you absolutely have to align on when you first start? And actually that also maybe kind of ties with a very practical question that flew into the Q&A around equity distribution at early stage. At what point do you bring that into the conversation when you're just starting out the co-founder relationship? Kari, can I go to you again first?
Yeah. All right. So I don't think there's one way to do this, but I'll offer some ideas that I've either seen people who are forming partnerships do or not do. And so one of the things that I think gets neglected early on is actually talking about the equity. I think there's often people find co-founders who are already in their sphere. Maybe it's even a friend or a partner or someone who you've known, and it can be really easy to get excited about an idea and say like, oh, we'll figure all that out, right? We'll figure that out when we get a little bit further down the road. But the reality is I see people start to figure it out only when it needs to be figured out. And by that point, it's almost a little bit too late, or there's a lot of tension and kind of involved. And so my recommendation to people I work with is to have an equity conversation way earlier than you actually think that you should. And then plan to revisit it often, because especially in the early days, the picture will change all the time. And so it doesn't mean you need to have like a super ironclad agreement, but to have opened the conversation about money, compensation, equity, and roles much earlier than you think. I recommend people do that. And to start practicing right away, saying things that are really hard to one another. I think that that's one of the things that causes co-founders to really struggle, is that they can't tell each other the truth. And maybe it's a little bit because losing that person is so scary that there's a tendency, I think, especially at the co-founder level, I see CEOs who can say the truth to anybody in the company, but struggle with their co-founders. And so practicing that really early on, I think, is important. Obviously, to align around the vision. And of course, the vision will change. So again, to continue revisiting it and making sure that you're still all headed towards the same star. And in the early days, I even recommend people do kind of a formal co-founder dinner or something where they talk about these things like even once a month, just because things are changing so fast. So align around the vision. And then also align around what it is that both people want in their lives. So I think this is another question that sometimes gets skipped over, which is not just around what do you want for the business, or are you excited about this idea, but what do you want the next 3 to 10 years of your life to look like? And is something going to change, right? Katia, I was thinking what you say, it's like, well, someone decides they want to move or they want to enter into a different life stage, or all of a sudden they'd like to make money when it was fine to not make money for the first 3 years. And now, circumstances have changed and we forgot to have that conversation. So yeah, to get really clear and get to know each other and what you want for your lives, I think is important. And to think about, a business is easily a 10-year investment. For some people, it'll be longer. For some people, it'll be shorter. But, it's something that you sign up for that will significantly impact the way that you live your life. So to be clear on that, I think is important. And then I recommend that everybody read The Founder's Dilemma. If you've not read this book, offers a lot of very important topics to consider when forming a company and when forming a co-founder partnership. And I believe it's chapter 16 specifically around setting up the relationship. And I'd ask co-founders to actually read it together and discuss all of the points.
Could you repeat the name of the book so we can put it in the chat?
Yeah, The Founder's Dilemma.
The Founder's Dilemma, yeah.
Yeah, by Noam Wasserman.
Amazing.
Maybe we could talk. I don't know how detailed we want to get on the equity question right now, but I have some thoughts on that. But maybe I'll let other people speak, and then we can circle back to it if there's more.
Let's do that, because I do think it's important to like dive in a little bit for practical advice. But sounds good. Okay, Katia, what are your thoughts? What's important to align on early on?
In my experience, I had the difference in commitments. That was my biggest point, and this is seems kind of my biggest fear in a sense, because the number of times I would be the one sort of like being very excited and super committed and saying, look, let's just work on it like 24-hour days and make this happen. And a co-founder that I would have at the time would not really, back to what Kari said, wouldn't really envisage their life to become this. And I feel like this was definitely my 2 times experience. I probably could give more color to what Kari said exactly. So once I started, I was actually at uni at the time, and we started a design studio together with a friend of mine from uni. And it was all great while we were having various coffees and teas discussing this whole thing and how great we're going to build it. However, when it actually came to the fact that we had to combine full-time studies with full-time work without missing any appointments, but actually delivering what we were promising our clients, my co-founder quickly backed out, and he just said, well, look, I'm a young guy. I'm like, I think we were 20 at the time. So he's like, look, I just want to travel. I just want to have a life. I want to have fun. I want to have girlfriends. I was like, I was so offended. I was so upset. But obviously, this is not something we discussed. And I was like, how could you do this to me? You leaving me all alone. And it's just like, just because I'm so mad and I'm happy to work till, 11 p.m. every day. And sort of, I think I started something at 6 a.m. because I needed to get in the office before the uni started, so I could actually do some stuff there. And like, so basically I had no life, but I didn't mind because I was so excited about what we were building. However, it wasn't the case with him. And I feel like this is something you should be able to not just ask, because if you just ask a person over a cup of coffee, are you committed? They, of course, got to say yes. So this is the kind of thing you kind of almost need to learn through building and doing something on a daily basis. And this is maybe before you even register a company. This is you just feel it somehow. I mean, I have no better tips to that than this, but it's just really not always clear what to expect your life to become once you become a startup co-founder. And the second experience of this misalignment was here in London, actually, when I started a consultancy, which again, I thought was brilliant, obviously. That was again me dragging this other girl into this business, and she just had a baby. I think the baby was like 3 or 4 months old or something. So she managed to get to save some cash to cover some of the childcare costs, and she would come into London for this couple of days a week to work with me. And the thing is, she really did not expect, or she did not want to commit to anything more than, a couple of hours a day to this business. And again, I got upset, and again I got a bit like, why doesn't she understand how amazing this is? Why doesn't she believe in this beautiful idea? And somehow she didn't. And and now looking back, like, how can you blame one? You can't really blame the person for not giving up their life to sort of do this business with you or without. But in general, this is a very big ask. And this is the one thing I feel like the co-founders should align on. Is it 2 hours a week kind of gig, or is it something we actually are going to build and succeed and kind of put our blood, sweat and tears into? That's kind of my biggest, I think, tip. And there's kind of a lot of other things come into that: the time commitment, the money commitment, any sort of commitments. I feel it should be equal. Because if they're not, then probably one of the people should not get as much equity, and then it's, again, could become one of those kind of lonely type of things.
Yeah, actually, also, I think on that, because we do get cases, I think, where we have a solo founder that comes, for example, to the accelerator, and then they've been building for a little bit of time. There's like a lot of commitment and passion for the cause. And then there's a recognition that it would be cool to have a co-founder to complement the skills and sort of go faster. And it makes a lot of sense. And then they find a person, maybe it's someone with marketing and sales skills, for example, or with technical skills. And that person comes over and maybe commitment is different because you're not like starting at the same time. And then if that person does want to come in as a co-founder, but will commit less time and less hours, is that a red flag? Is that a no-go, or is that an equity distribution conversation? Is that a co-founder, or is that a CTO or a chief like business development person that you hire on a salary with like an equity? How do you know in that stage that person is co-founder material?
I personally never had the experience of bringing someone into the business halfway through doing this. I feel like in this case, it's more like an employee. I had these experiences when I got brilliant employees who changed the course of my business, but I never had the ambition to sort of make them my co-founder, because that was not what they were signing up for again. And but that's just, again, my experience. I'm sure it's somehow possible. I know a lot of stories from the companies we mentor that it does happen sometimes, but I feel like it's a lot harder in a sense. It's one thing when two of you with nothing sit at the table over a cup of coffee and build this vision, and the other thing when you have already built the vision, already done a lot of things, and then you invited someone else into your business.
Yeah, and actually, I was that person. In the ISL's been around 15 years, and I've been part of the journey for 14 years. So although only recently, as we did our rebrand at the start of this year, I felt entitled to call myself co-founder, I did join as an employee. The business was set up by Henry, my business partner, stroke co-founder now, and someone else. And I joined a year in. I'd worked with Henry before, so we had that trust. It was pretty apparent early on that the other co-founder or the other person in the business probably had different aspirations. So they exited, and it was a bit of a messy exit. And I never really wanted to found a business. I simply wanted to work in an environment that I would enjoy and where it could maximize my potential. And when we had the conversation only 6 months ago around titles as part of the rebrand, and I spoke to Henry about, we're rebranding from director, which we both were. I'm not sure about calling myself co-founder. He looked at me like I was a bit stupid, and he's like, well, of course you're a co-founder. You've been here for 95% of the journey and 100% of what matters. So that was, a strange thing from the perspective of coming in as that employee. But if you asked anybody in my business, was it my business? Was I co-founded? If you looked at the cap table, then all those things said yes. But psychologically, I probably didn't feel as comfortable putting that co-founder title on it. We've definitely worked with companies where we're working on an assignment now. The business is less than 12 months old. They're hiring someone to focus on the commercial side. That person will almost be a sort of a co-founded designate. So you can get a bit obsessed over titles, I think, but they're going to hire that person in as a chief commercial officer, commercial director, with the view that that person would be almost retrospectively seen as co-founder. if they get to the point where there's that level of trust. But that's not always practical. But I think being able to talk about stages in a journey, whether it's then the title changes or whether the equity changes or whether the responsibilities and decision-making changes, it's obviously crazy to think you'd jump straight into marrying someone on the first date. And often that, you can stretch that to the co-founder side of things. We've both got the intention to make this a long-term relationship. And one day we'll call ourselves co-founders, husband and wife, and wife, whatever it may be. But we don't necessarily jump straight into it to begin with, and realizing there's a state A of, not co-founders, state B of co-founders. And sometimes there's quite a messy bit in the middle that may or may not work out. And being sort of a business dreamt up optimistically needs to be grounded in reality, particularly when it comes to really emotional and financially important things like equity and reward, for sure.
Alan, I kind of want to jump in because I was also that other person.
Okay. Yeah.
And it actually, for me, flipped the other way in that I joined Pilea a little bit later, but kind of quickly became the primary person doing the work, and then bought out my other two partners. And so I kind of even went the other direction, right? It's like I started as kind of a person who hopped on board, but I was thinking, Karina, about your question of like, how do you know if they're a co-founder? Like I was thinking from the opposite of like, how did I know that I was a co-founder when I joined? And the feeling I had was like this is mine, and not like in an egotistical sort of way, but I feel this sort of immense like weight and ownership of this project. And even though I knew that it had started in someone else's brain, that when I started becoming invested in it, it took over all of the space in my heart that I had to create something. And when I imagined doing something else, it was like it was incongruent, right? It was almost like the project had chosen me or something like this. And so, yeah, I quickly, in fact, I sometimes forget until just now, I kind of forgotten that like it wasn't actually originally my idea. Like it feels so much like a part of me that like I couldn't help but be all in on it. And so I wonder, if you find a person who feels that way, that they might be a co-founder, waiting for the relationship or the moment for that title to be given to them.
I like that a lot. I think you can definitely see and feel the difference in people that come on boards or express interest. There's an employee mindset, and then sort of a co-founding mindset, and that's exactly the difference. It's this is mine, like that's kind of this sort of embracing. That's really cool. Shall we talk a little bit about kind of practical things? So we go back and forth between maybe psychology and then things that are a bit more grounding. So roles and responsibilities, maybe like it kind of also weaves into the co-founder agreement, but how early is it important to define roles and responsibilities? Does that play into the agreement that you have with each other? And does that play into the equity distribution? Who wants to take that on first?
I know that within ISL, we definitely looked at it too late. So I think perhaps similar to Kari's point around the equity, it's probably something you want to look at earlier than you might default to without prompting. I think that, partly it might be the titles, who's going to be CEO, who's going to be, CTO, if it's not obvious based on your experience and your skills, and having some really honest conversations around that, which might not play into equity, but what if someone's going to be out there as the CEO, then that's one thing, but how does that affect the decision-making? Can you have truly a democratic, 3-person business, or if someone's being called the CEO, then does that mean they have the final say on certain things? So I think the decision-making comes into the roles and responsibilities. I know when Henry and I first sat down and talked about it, like I say, it was probably too late, and we realized we were overlapping on too many areas and overlooking too many areas. And I definitely felt a lease of life once we had that conversation and formalized things to the extent of writing job descriptions for our roles. that then I stopped going to a lot of the meetings that we'd had internally because we realized we were duplicating, and Henry trusted me, I trusted him. So why did we both need to be sat there for an hour, potentially confusing the team about which way to turn and avoiding being able to do what our role suggested we would do to add value to the business. So, and having seen founding teams that look to bring others in, I've seen confusion from candidates where it's not been clear who does what. So I think both from a founder or co-founder to co-founder relationship, making sure you then have the trust and the structure to not do things as much as do things. And then as you grow your team, to help signal to people how things are done around here and how decisions are made and who they turn to on certain things. I think it's it can be really important.
Kari, Katia, do you want to add to that?
What's the question again? I
Roles and
got so much into what Alan was saying, so I forgot the initial question.
Roles and responsibilities. At
Yeah,
what point do you sit down to do that, and how do you do that?
yeah, I've been through quite a lot of times building something with co-founders who are very similar to me, and it was very hard to share, to split the roles and responsibilities. At some stage in my previous company, we had to call each other co-CEO because we both were we had exactly the same skill set and kind of similar personalities. And obviously we were lacking a ton of things, but there were things we did well. We did well sales, we did well motivational stuff, we did well the vision. And then, quite a lot of things we did not do well, which is the operational things and the strategy and the the more down to earth, bringing this whole and actually communication and managing the team. So I guess since then, when we started business, me and Karina, we knew exactly who's good at what. Possibly fairly early on, we kind of understood what each one brings. And not so long ago, we decided to actually assign roles to ourselves. So it's a bit more clear for the team almost as well to about who does what. And I was a CEO in my previous company, and I knew that managing teams and doing CEO type work was something I found really kind of almost against my nature a little bit. However, I'm very good at growth and building stuff, growing stuff, setting things. So we kind of decided between us that's how we're going to call ourselves. I'm the head of growth essentially, and Karina's the head of the company, which I think works well. Then you can ask Karina her opinion on this, but it definitely didn't happen the first day, because I feel like there's nothing wrong with doing the same stuff for the first year or two, or maybe not two, maybe first year. Because you just happen to do so, because you happen to be on the same calls, and then you have different opinions on this, and you happen to be solving the same issues, and you have different approach to this, and it's fine, and that's good. And with my previous co-founder, we even had the same email address for a while. We literally were responding to people from the same email address, so we saw exactly what was happening. So low tech, but it worked.
Yeah, I could also add, it's not like a clean, I find it's not like a clean thing. It's my personally first time having a co-founder, and I think there's also certain templates of what's expected, and you don't have to fit into that template. I think for us it's still a journey, and but it is very much discovering what is it that you're good at, what is sort of your zone of genius, and how can you create, and what are your different ambitions are, and what's important to you, and what parts of the business you actually enjoy being involved in. And I don't know, I think for me it's such a personal thing that takes a bit of time to figure out and to land. So I find the roles and responsibilities to be theoretically it should be easy to sit down and just divide on day one, but it's just not, it's never as simple.
I suppose as the company grows, it gets more clear. And then you also have more people as well doing other things. Like between the CMO and the CEO, you kind of need a COO as well, which is something we both do at the moment. But at some stage, if we do happen to become one of those really successful companies with a fairly large team, we'll definitely need to sort of assign these responsibilities to someone else. And it's just, I feel like this is just how you just chop things off as you grow, for what you actually need someone else to do who can do it better than you. And I think that's totally normal. That's kind of the natural thing to do.
Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about the co-founder agreement, which if you Google co-founder relationships is going to come up in every search result. Kari, Alan, can you talk about your experience maybe creating one? Do you recommend that for founders early on? What goes into this agreement? And how have you seen founders approach it well?
Alan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think I've definitely, seen a variety of them. I think sometimes they can be simple one pages that talk about headlines. Sometimes they can be much more legal documents. I think it's important you have something that gives clarity on who's going to do what. And increasingly, I think it's more important to then have something that covers things like equity. And it's all well and good to plan on things going well, but something that deals with contingencies. So, with the UK companies, if you don't have something like that, it's often going to fall back to the Articles of Association, the shareholders agreement. And I know that when we went through the first years of ISL and one of the co-founders exited, none of us really knew what would happen in that situation. And there was clearly documentation there that had a process around value of shareholdings and exiting someone from the business. But none of us knew what it was until we had to look at it. So I think a founder agreement can be a really good way to upfront have the positive aspirations of being on this journey together, but have something that partly frames what that journey will look like if all goes well, but also what it will look like if things don't go well. And to make sure that although you might not know which one of you has a more chance of jumping off the ship along the way, there is agreement around how things work at the point where that might happen. And I think just, really setting expectations from the outset, whether it's around equity or decision making, or if you reach an impasse, how that is resolved, and formalizing thing. Again, probably a theme that I'd play on is formalizing things in some sort of agreement more than you might feel you need to after a couple of coffees and everything seems positive, but the reality is that it doesn't always end up being successful.
I can add about this, what's part of my experience. I actually was very lucky because we had this investor come in at some stage, and he demanded this type of documents that Alan, you're referring to be in place. Because between us, we were like, everything is brilliant. We will never argue. It's all great, and it's just, how can anything possibly go wrong? And so unsurprisingly, I suppose, or surprisingly, I don't know, it went wrong pretty drastically and to a pretty extreme kind of extent. These provisions that the investor added, the one that saved us was called bad leaver provision. Do you know that one, Alan?
Yeah.
That is if somebody leaves the company on not good terms, and I feel like I think there was a description of what good terms or not good terms kind of look like, what a good leaver versus bad leaver looks like. Basically, if that happens, the shares of this person can be purchased by the rest of the shareholders at a discounted rate. In our case, it was 50%. And this really saved my company, this one little clause, because otherwise there was no chance. I would have to just close it completely.
Yeah, and we've seen similar things around, IP as well. If you don't have the proper protection in there, that the IP rests with the company rather than the individual, you can have a business that could be really valuable, but because of a falling out or simply just a principle, then that IP is with the individual who might be a good leaver, bad leaver, but you haven't proactively addressed what happens in this situation. So I think it's, depending on the nature of the business, it's really important to make sure you've got that sort of stuff covered as well.
Yeah, I could not agree more. You've covered most of the things that I was thinking about, but I mean, also thinking like, it's really hard when you're starting a relationship to imagine it breaking down, and also to imagine that you might be the person who causes it to break down significantly. But I encourage founders to think about the failure case and then to imagine it from both sides. So when they're looking at the agreement, to imagine that like either one of you or both of you were the driver of the failure case, and then to imagine all of the things that you might want to have for yourself, if you were kind of like a victim of someone leaving in a bad way, including non-competes, including what happens with the shares, what are the prices there, like what happens if the person wants to be an advisor or stay on the board or stay connected in some way, like is that just even if it's an outline of questions, right? You might not need to have every part of the process figured out, but to have talked about it, like I said earlier, and avoid having secret contracts or secret expectations that maybe people thought it should be one way and actually isn't that way. Alan, I was so struck also by the fact that you had this agreement but didn't know what was in it. And when we're investing in companies, I always ask them, what are your agreements? Who will leave if something happens? How will you leave? How did you come up with your equity splits? And if people say, oh, we just did whatever was standard, we split it 50-50, that for me is a huge red flag, to just say we just put something together, we haven't looked at it, we don't know, we haven't evaluated or like really had a discussion. Now, of course, most of us hadn't done that. I didn't do that in any of the beginnings of my companies. But so I'm watching other people and like, ooh, yeah, have that conversation and know what it is that you're agreeing to at the time you agree to it would be, maybe helpful and motivating as you're working through challenges. And I feel like, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna quickly tell everyone that drop your questions in the chat if you have any, and we'll make sure to get them answered for you. Just a reminder for people on the webinar. But carry on, Kari.
I just wanted to speak to equity. I don't know. Are we ready to talk about?
Yeah. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the elephant.
It feels hairy. Like it's like the hairiest thing kind of that is in the agreement, and I think. I've also supported at least 2 companies through co-founder breakups that ended up causing the company to fail, that were simply around equity disagreements. And so I feel pretty strongly about this. Like I said, if I encourage founders to actually try to not have a 50-50 agreement. Now, you might work your way into a 50-50 agreement, and that's brilliant, but to start with the assumption that it's not equal, so that you have to have a hard conversation around what am I really dedicated to doing here, and to get really clear on, I think about equity actually as an energy exchange. So less like what are the impacts of our roles and like getting really clear. I think everyone's kind of said this, but at the beginning, it's really hard to know what your role is going to be. And it's really hard to know what your contribution or your impact on the business might be. And for a while, the impacts are usually pretty minimal, right? Like we're all working really hard and like kind of nothing's happening. And so I like to think about the initial conversation around equity as an energy exchange and thinking like, what do I need in order to feel that feeling that I had, which is like, this is mine. I feel committed to this and I feel taken care of by the business for the contribution or the sacrifices that I may make. And to have the initial conversation around that. Then as things start to formalize, and this is where I think it's really important, I actually ask founders quarterly to have like a formal sit down review at the beginning, that often actually, to review their equity agreements and their roles and just to kind of check in on things. And then you can start to shift them, right, and make them reflect your actual contributions or your actual titles as those things formalize. But anyway, those are some thoughts that I have on equity.
Thank you. So that was amazing, the energy exchange bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is a little bit of an energy exchange. Yeah. So why not the cap table? We have actually a follow-up question on this from Gitanjali from one of the startups in our current cohort. Do you recommend first working with someone for 6 months and then discuss equity, or just from day one have that conversation?
I would say working for 6 months for sure, even though it didn't happen with us, but I feel like we knew each other for many years before, so that's a different situation. However, if I had been working with my previous co-founder for 6 months before anything, I probably would have made a different decision at that time. But on the other hand, practically, it's not actually that possible. When you're in the UK, you set up a company like week 1, and at least that's what I like to do. I just like to have a brand, the name, the logo, company registered, and this is when you need to input your equity shareholding. So I don't know really how people do it practically.
I think, yeah, I agree. In an ideal world, you'd be able to work with that person. I think probably the benchmark would be at what point are we going to be able to trust each other? So, Katia, Karina, maybe you already trust each other on day one because of some previous connection. Yeah. I know that was the case with myself and my co-founder. For others, and depending on whether it's one person bringing someone else in or two people forming or more people forming something new from day one, I think it's got to be the point at which we feel we trust each other, and you're not going to be able to predict that personally. So there's, like Kari said, there's those review points to make sure that that trust is being maintained or developed. I think there probably are some things that I don't know so much detail around, but where you can have reverse vesting and make sure there's that protection where stuff falls back to the company if someone exits, rather than giving it all to everybody up front. But I think probably it's unlikely to be the first conversation you have around these things, but it definitely shouldn't be the last conversation you have. It has to be pretty quickly to make sure that you're on the same page. And I think we're talking obviously naturally around, well, what if things go wrong? I think even just having these conversations early and talking about the principles behind can help you establish if this is someone you want to be working with. If they're straight away, well, hold on, I'm here on day one, so even if I've left after 1 year, in 10 years time the company sells, I expect 50%, then if you feel that really bristles with you, maybe it's a signal they're not the sort of person you want to be working with. So hopefully you can avoid these issues ever becoming an issue by addressing them early and recognizing that it's part of the getting to know you is talking about that journey. If it starts to take different directions, how you're both going to address that, and making sure you're aligned on values and the way in which things are going to be done, to know that you don't know what the journey is going to look like, but at least you know how you're going to treat things and judge things along the way. And there's enough overlap that it's likely to go well, even if there's no guarantee.
Yeah. It's so much like dating, right? You might not talk about marriage on the first date, but you're going to talk about marriage way before you're actually planning on getting married. Because if your intention is to get married to this person, you'd like to know if that's even interesting to them, right? And then you might also like to know what it means to them, or what that kind of partnership might be like in the future, right? Then you go through several iterations of imagining it or kind of talking around it. So again, I think I'm totally in agreement. It's way earlier than you think that you probably should have the conversation, but I have, since my first kind of set of mistakes, I set up a 1-year cliff for folks who I'm going to work with. And then we make a guess about what equity will look like at the beginning of our relationship. And then before the equity vests, we kind of revisit and have an honest conversation to make sure that what's on paper actually represents what has happened, right? So we kind of make a guess, then we look at what actually happened. We try to be really honest about that. And I sometimes give it a full year, before you really like sign the paperwork. And I mean, Alan, you didn't become a co-founder until even much later than that, like you could do it whenever is the right time.
And I think the key thing with the equity, because it is, a key point of this, is that it has to be fair, which doesn't necessarily mean equal. So you want to have a conversation, whether it's either the traction you've already got with the company before you're bringing that person on board, whether it's the resources, that may be time, that may be money, that may be energy, whether it's the network you've got, which some people might put a value on, but the factors that make up the fair share mean that it probably doesn't end up being equal, unless that's a principle you both agree on. And like you said, Kari, then you may predict what it's going to look like to be fair, but making sure you then have a point at which you can review that, or several points at which you can review that.
Yeah, I think it's also a little bit, I don't know, there is an element of risk, of course, but there's no way to completely eliminate it, like with any, risk. That's why it's called one. And it's just like when you're dating someone, there's always a risk that you fall head over heels in love, and then your heart is broken, but you do it over and over again because it's all worth it. And I think it's, I guess with co-founding or trusting people in general, like you're never gonna, because it's questions we get a lot, and you're never going to eliminate the risk. All you can do is maybe use things like the, cliff provision, or talk about equity early on and have difficult conversations. But there's a reason there still needs to be trust, and there is still that risk. And at some point, you just have to take the leap and kind of intuitively go for it or not. So I think that's also kind of maybe advice to some of the early founders that you can't completely eliminate it. You have to just make a call and try to play it out as transparently with each other as possible.
Yeah, don't get too scientific about it, and maybe just leave yourself some space to experiment and try things out, for sure.
Yeah. We have a few minutes left. I just wanted to kind of maybe go around, and if each one of you can share one key lesson that you would like for people to take away, or one key practice that you would like co-founders to take away, something that you really want people to remember from advice that you give in this session. Who wants to go first? Kari, I'm gonna go to you.
The major piece of advice I actually have not said in the session yet, but I'll say it now. It's related to something that I did say, which is that I think one of the major existential threats to co-founder relationships is not being able to say what's really happening. And so I think that maybe I'm biased because I'm a coach, but as co-founders, I think having a coach, having a space where you can sit in a safe space and say what needs to be said, even if you don't do it regularly, start a relationship with someone who can support you in having the conversations that you need to have, and access them regularly, because sometimes having a third person is actually the thing that makes the two people get to work together better. So that's create a space for honesty, and I think a coach is a great way to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Building on Kari's point, I know that we found benefit from having that external person, a coach or a chair within our business. And a lot of the startups that we've worked with as they go through, sometimes it's the relationship with the co-founder, sometimes it's to manage the relationship with the investor. But either way, there's significant others that are part of building that business. Then having that sounding board there and someone who, I think Kari said, creates the space so that you can talk freely and openly. But sometimes it can be, where Henry and I have worked really well together, it's every 2 weeks we allocated, half a day to, you can get dragged into the day-to-day of the business. So every 2 weeks we had half a day, and sometimes we talked about one thing, sometimes we talked about 10 things. And that made sure that when we came back into the business, we were aligned and able to separate out our responsibilities. So I think that, probably in danger of repeating Kari's point, but having a regular space to connect with your co-founder, most likely away from the business, is massively important to keep that relationship strong.
Awesome. Katia, what about you?
I don't think I have a major piece of wisdom here, apart from I don't think, well, there's so many things you can read about how to make a marriage last or anything, right? But I feel like what I've learned through very hard co-founder breakups and 2 divorces, that sometimes you just go different ways. And as scary as it sounds, it actually works out okay. And it works out for the better, for the best. And as much as most of us always try to keep things forever doesn't really exist in business life as well, because business changes as it grows. People change every week, every month. Everything is always a flow. There's always a bit of movement and everything. And if there is one piece of wisdom, is like, don't kind of cling too hard to the existing status quo and try to make it work or try to make it the same. As much as as some people ask, I have actually a really good therapist. She's not my therapist, but I know her for ages. And she had this, when somebody asks her how to make my marriage kind of stay the same forever, and she's like, this is the most ridiculous thing you can possibly imagine, because your marriage changes every week. It's just, nothing stays. Like, it's just this kind of mindset that I feel like, especially when running a startup, it's a bit philosophical, but it really helps in business as well. Nothing stays forever. Nothing. You need to let people go. You need to let people come. You need to let people and companies and clients and flows and investors, all these things always reshape, reform, and sort of mold into something different all the time. Obviously, it doesn't cancel the fact that you need to know where you're going, what you're building, and all these other lovely things that we learn in business courses. But the philosophical aspect of it knowing that nothing is forever, I feel really helps me at least to not get too crazy over things in business life.
Totally, yeah. Not forcing it sometimes. It's almost like, I love that. I feel like this conversation, there's a good deal of philosophy that we went into, and I think I don't know, I feel like it actually is the stuff that that underpins and actually matters a lot. And just having the practical tools, or just having the agreement, or just having the document you need, or just doing the equity conversations, it's all just doing the mechanics doesn't really that's not what matters. It's actually, I think, the more the human behavior of it, and the finding ways to communicate. And there's one book that I will recommend that's called Nonviolent Communication. And I think it's, as I do think one of the hardest things is to have difficult conversations with each other. And I recommend that book as like a manual as to how to have those conversations in a nonviolent way and in a productive way. So that's a little bit from me. Nonviolent communication, yes. Awesome. But thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom, for being quite open and also vulnerable about your personal experiences as co-founders. That always really helps, and I think inspires a lot of people, which is personal experience. Thank you for all that have joined, and we hope to see you in future webinars, and stay in tune to our upcoming events on our website. And as mentioned in the beginning, our next cohort for the FemTech Lab Accelerator starts on March 1st. And if you're keen to apply, make sure you sign up on our website to be the first one to hear. Thank you also so much, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.